Hi, everyone. I hope you guys are doing well today. Um, my name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the education director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee. Hi, again. I think I just got this going live. Every day's a new adventure. My name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the education director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee, and I'm here today for our museum moment. This is ending out our third week of museum moments. This is our ninth story. I feel like we've kind of started to figure out the kind of fabric of how these look, and we're excited by the interactions that we get. We love it when you guys hop on, and then we're also excited to see what people say after the fact. um, Today, our museum moment is capping off a week of exploring business stories and professional successes in Milwaukee. So, we are today going to be exploring Florence Eiseman and her story. And I love this story. It's one of my favorites to tell in the museum. And I love having the opportunity to tell it to this broader audience and to be able to talk to people about Florence Eiseman and who she is and what she did in terms of children's fashion and kind of that transitional time period in the 1940s as people, more and more industries became mechanized and more things went from being homemade to uh, being made by factories and manufacturers, and how she's kind of in this kind of in between place of those two fields. So, Florence Eisman was born in the United States. She grew up in Minneapolis, and she was actually a first generation American. Both of her parents were immigrants. And she moves to Chicago to help her brother in his business. She's kind of a girl Friday. That's how her son, Lori, describes her in his oral history, which I will share with you after this. It's on our YouTube page. And she had actually taken a stenography course, and he says up until her death, she could still do she could do shorthand, and she could type brilliantly because she had taken the secretarial course. Um, right after she finished high school, she goes and she's working for her brother, and it's there that she's living in an apartment where she meets her future husband, also named Lori. And Lori and she moved to Milwaukee because his sister had moved to Milwaukee to be with her husband, who was working as a lawyer. And her husband, Florence's husband, Lori, goes to work in the in his law firm as a paralegal, and Florence starts making a home for them and building a life for them in Shorewood. Now, she has two sons, and after having the second son in 1931, the doctor recognizes that she is nervous. There is all sorts of nervous energy. I've heard, although I couldn't find this in any of my documentation today, that maybe that second son, Bob, whose daughter Marge may or may not pop on here at some point, was a little bit of a colicky baby. And then he was one of those babies that, just was always crying. And as anyone who's had that baby knows, there's just nothing you can do. And so rather than telling her this is her fault or you need to, be a better mother, the doctor said, you need to do something to settle your nerves. You need to do something to make things better for you. So she started sewing. She starts taking up sewing and doing things for herself and figuring out, what that looks like. And lo and behold, the stuff she starts making is pretty awesome. In the oral history, her son says, you know what? These were things that it was the Depression. She was making presents for people. She was making things that were different and beautiful, but it was a way of saving money too. Um, Once World War II starts, she actually starts getting into manufacturing dresses for friends and family, and they would pay her for these things. But what she determined is she didn't really like having a client to have to please their very particular whims. She liked better making whatever she wanted, and then people would take those sorts of things. Um, Her husband, meanwhile, during the war, had been working in um, at A.O. Smith in manufacturing, and another one of the people working there, and he had gone into business making toys, making these kinds of model trains. And he had this thought, maybe we'll get into some sort of major success with these trains. So After the war is over, he takes some samples of his trains and some samples of Florence's dresses down to Marshall Fields in Chicago. And they come back in Chicago. They come back that afternoon with a purchase order of $3,000 worth of products. In 2020 numbers, that would be about $45,000 for a first investment into a company that didn't even really exist at this point. In fact, Lori goes and he buys fabric from Marshall Fields Fabric. I mean, if you, and this is one of those things Marge Eisman always says when we're doing this program with our Girl Scouts during the year, is she always says, you don't buy, wholesale fabric. You don't buy retail fabric. You buy wholesale fabric. But they just didn't have any experience. And the order was for about 300 dresses. They didn't even have anybody else working in the company. They just had themselves doing their thing. So they start making these dresses and pounding them out, and suddenly they're in business, and the business grows. And it grows to such an extent that Lori leaves his business making the toy trains and becomes part of the Florence Eiseman brand. The Florence Eiseman brand has always been about children's wear. And some of the hallmarks of the brand are children should look like children and not little adults. And to that end, most of the styles are really designed without waists. You don't see belted waists, you don't see sashes, because little kids, up until like 10, 12, they have bellies. They don't have waists. So why should we make a waist where there isn't one? They should be comfortable. I found this great article from the Fort Worth newspaper where it talks about how all of the fabrics are lined and how zippers are hidden so that you don't have that sense of an itchy tag or a zipper or something where seams are coming together the kids get so frustrated by. There should be a sense that these are going to be very expensive, very well-made clothes, but they're also going to be timeless. They're going to be the sorts of things that you could wear in 1965, in 1982, and in 2010. And they do become passed down. They do become the sorts of things that generation after generation of families wear Florence Eiseman pieces. They're also excellent hand-me-downs because they can grow with the kid. So often the pinafores would have buttons at the top where you could, they would have two buttons, one for when you're a little bit smaller and one for your bigger. You could have hems that could come out. There are all sorts of ways of extending the life of a Florence Eiseman piece. They are picked up by the glitterati of the day in the 1950s. And I looked for this picture, and I'm sure I'll find it after at some point, or if somebody else wants to throw it up. You see Debbie Reynolds posing with Carrie Fisher on her lap in a Florence Eiseman. The Kennedy children wear Florence Eiseman clothes. Princess Grace dresses her children in Florence Eiseman. And it really becomes this kind of this thing that you want to be. It's where it's aspirational. In 1955, Florence Eiseman becomes the first children's wear designer named Designer of the Year by Neiman Marcus. Other people included that year include Balmain and actually Princess Grace, who just wears clothes very beautifully. And she is a style icon for ages. One of the things that I believe the director of Neiman Marcus says is that she had perfect taste. She brings art influences into her designs, and you can see some of them look very much like Miro, or they have some kind of pop art influences. And one of the things that I love that I discovered when I went to see an exhibit about her work at the Museum of Wisconsin Art in West Bend is that early in the 1950s, the company had started with something that you hear about now, but I'm surprised to hear about it from then: functional fashion that would work for people with disabilities who have difficulty buttoning clothes, or who have difficulty because of canes or crutches or some sort of brace, and that they were already looking into this in the 1950s. It's really amazing. The brand is still designed in Milwaukee, and in fact, I'm hoping that Miranda Levy is here, who is one of their designers and actually worked on the team with the Museum of Wisconsin Art as well. And some of it is still produced in-house. I always have to say, one of the things I love about working with this is that it's a brand that was developed by a woman with a keen understanding for what women and what families needed out of their kind of high-end fashion. And it continues to serve those purposes. It continues to dress kids in a way that is timeless. And some of the things that I'm going to share after this um, include pictures of those. So I encourage you to look through a bunch of those different links. The other thing that I will say, and I'm going to end on this story because I think it's amazing, is that during the Obama administration, their baby gift that they gave to their friends or staffers who had babies were Florence Eiseman pieces. And this is an amazing story. They found through one of their staff members, they found out about the brand, they found out that it was made in America, and they were excited about it. So they contracted two different designs, one for boys and one for girls. And on the inside, they had the presidential seal embroidered by one of the Florence Eiseman staff people. And they also had their signatures embroidered on. And there are about 100 babies somewhere in the US who have these unbelievable artifacts of both Milwaukee Company and the Obama administration. If anyone ever wants to donate one of those to Jewish Museum Milwaukee, we would really love it. But it was that they saw this as a brand, and the brand kept it a secret until after the Obamas left the White House. So it just goes to show you that this is a brand that was made in the 1940s that continues to have relevance today. And I love being able to share this story. Go out and check out some of the information. If you've enjoyed these pieces, consider a donation to Jewish Museum Milwaukee. You can find that capability at jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. Next week, we will be looking at Passover. We're only going to have one session next week because of the holiday of Passover. And so join me Tuesday at 2. And I have a great Shabbat Shalom. And thanks so much for joining me.